Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma, and this is a year-long exploration of the Torah through the lens of an atheist. So, I'm an atheist, and I'm also somebody who is engaged with a Jewish community, and this is my attempt to understand the Torah through my own worldview as an atheist. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, and it's the sacred text of the Jewish people. In a synagogue, we read a Torah scroll, which is a big long scroll, usually made of, well, I can't remember if it's made of parchment or of animal hide. I should know that, but I think it's made of animal hide, but I'm not absolutely certain of that. Anyways, it's a big long scroll, and it's all of these sheets stitched together, and it makes a big roll, a Torah scroll. And then each sheet of the Torah is written by hand by somebody that's just their only job in life, is they write out the Torah and they do an exact replica of whatever was the Torah before. So that kind of the way that the Torah is reproduced actually kind of gets into previous episodes of Torah study, atheist Torah study, where I've talked about the way that text gets frozen and how we deal with that, but not just the way it gets frozen, but the implications of having a text that's frozen. So both of those together. Anyways, so that's what the Torah is. In a synagogue, what we do is we roll the Torah around to whatever Parsha it is, and we read that. And the Torah is in Hebrew. Hebrew is language that was spoken in Judea in, third, fourth century, excuse me. Anyways, later on in Jewish history, the lingua franca became Hebrew and Aramaic. And over a long time, Hebrew fell out of use. And then it was just kind of revived again with the creation of the state of Israel. I mean, in synagogues, Hebrew always continued to exist, and it was used always in synagogues. But Hebrew as a common parler France, like a common language spoken among the people, was something that was kind of, they began practicing again with the creation of the state of Israel. And so people in Israel speak Hebrew now, but they don't speak biblical Hebrew, and they don't speak synagogue Hebrew. They speak Israeli Hebrew. So, anyways, yes, the Torah is written in Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew, and I can read a little bit of Hebrew. So everything I know about the Torah, I pretty much know from English. And my understanding of Hebrew is that Hebrew provides a much richer understanding of the Torah, because when you read the Torah in the Hebrew, you kind of understand its fluidity, how it's intended to guide you through a series of ideas and kind of suggest what those placeholders of words mean. So I think when you read it in the Hebrew, you get rid of some of the fixed quality of language that freezes language in place, while not totally losing it. So that's just my understanding. Someday maybe I'll study Hebrew enough to really read the Torah well in Hebrew. I don't know. I've got a lot of things I want to do in my life. I'm not sure that studying Hebrew is on the top of my list, but if I have $1 million and I don't have to work 60 hours a week, then maybe someday I'll study Hebrew. Anyways, so let's go on. Okay, so we're going to do this the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok dvorei Torah. And we're reading the Parsha today. This Parsha is Vayigash. Vayigash is the second to last chapter of the book of Bereshit. and we're really deep into the Joseph narrative. We're almost at the very end of Joseph's story, and this is the high climax. So, Richard Friedman, as I've said before, Richard Friedman considers the Torah to be one of the world's first novels. And here we are, almost at the, what is that called? With the climax. We're at the climax of the story. And this is the part of the Torah where um, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and his brothers get to see who he really is. And just, this really incredible story about kind of self revelation. It's like, it's the big reveal. That's what Joseph's doing. It's the big reveal. So that's kind of where the story's at. And from an atheist perspective, why is this interesting to me as an atheist? I mean, I get into this a lot in other versions of atheist Torah study, but I mean, I'll say it again here because I think it bears reflecting on at every recording. That this story is a story that was written by somebody, and it's supposed to teach you something about God. At least that's what the whole collection is supposed to do. Now, actually, this story teaches you something about God, whatever God is, at the end of the story. And actually, during the big reveal, it does too. But I kind of feel like what this story is about is, I think it's like an attempt by the author. My understanding is that this book of the Torah was written last, and it was probably written sometime in other episodes of Atheist Torah Study. I've gotten into my own pet theories about when the Torah was written, like based on the evidence. I think probably around the 3rd century BC, and probably this was the part that was. I mean, Bereshit feels so different from everything else in the Torah. I wonder if this, well, who knows when all of this stuff was compiled. You can't really tell anything by looking at the text. I mean, I guess you can. I mean, if you're doing biblical criticism, I guess you can. I can't. I mean, I can't tell anything, but I'm sure a scholar who knows a lot more than I can see much more in this. But my theory is that this was probably added on to, I mean, it's so different from the rest of the Torah that it was probably added on, but it was put at the beginning. We actually do have an understanding of how this happens in other religions because we see it very clearly in Christianity. I mean, and, Christianity, my theory about Christianity, which unfortunately, even though this is Atheist Torah Study, I do end up talking a little bit. I hope not too much, but every now and then I talk about other religions, most notably Christianity, because it's something that I'm also familiar with. And I mean, I think, so my theory is, and I'm like this huge fan of Joseph Atwill. I mean, I think Joseph Atwill is like this genius. And he wrote this book called Caesar's Messiah, basically arguing that Josephus, who was a Jewish historian and was captured, he was originally somebody who fought against the Romans, and then he was captured by the Romans, and kind of like Joseph, he sort of became, he became a Roman in the same way that Joseph became an Egyptian. And so Josephus became a Roman, and he served in the court of, I can't remember which one it was, Tiberius Caesar, or one of those people. Anyways, he served in the court of one of those people. And Joseph Atwill's theory is that whoever the Caesar was at that time, I think it was Tiberius Caesar, and Josephus and one other person, like, all kind of co-conspired to write a text that would like reshape how Jews understood their religion. So he was basically kind of instructed, or maybe it was his own idea, to write a whole new version of Judaism, with the text, but to make it look like it was somehow an organic process. And so he did that really cleverly by writing four different texts. Because in Judaism, when you study Torah, when you study Tanakh, it's really clear that there's, kind of an organic, compiled way that the Tanakh is put together, which reflects its historicity. And that when they wrote the New Testament, the second half of the Bible, Josephus wanted to give that impression of the text. So, like writing four texts. And then the text had to really be aware of Jewish law, Jewish custom, but to create a new religion where Jewish impulses were pacified and where they were turned into something that was subservient to the state. So that's kind of Joseph Atwell's theory. And it's not just his theory, it's actually a theory of 19th century German biblical scholars. I mean, this is a theory that's actually about 150 years old. But Joseph Atwell articulated it in a way that was very interesting. And by the way, the academic world, the world of biblical scholars, thinks that Joseph Atwell's ideas are total crap. So just, I want to make sure that I'm, reflecting what the world of biblical scholarship thinks about Atwell. They think that his ideas are just stupid. So what's the point of this? Why am I talking about this? The reason I'm talking about this is because I think that the way in which that text, the Christian text, was canonized by Rome in the 3rd or 4th century AD is an example of how a text which had been floating around in the ether of a culture becomes consolidated. Now, I don't know of a record for exactly how the Torah became consolidated, because I think that it was compiled. I mean, the Torah was compiled in different kinds of ways. Like one version of the Torah was that the Torah was compiled by Rabbi Akiva, and that it was put together after the destruction of the Second Temple. But I've also come across examples of scholars who have argued that the Torah was mostly compiled, starting in the 3rd century BC, and that the entire Tanakh was mostly put together in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. So what seems really clear to me is that there's an epic of Western religious narrative that starts in about the 3rd century BC, and I think it's definitely tied to the Library of Alexandria. And there's a lot of back and forth going on between different scribes and different scholars. And of course, empire plays a big role in this, and Jewish tradition. And these documents are getting bounced around in the ancient Near Middle East, right around the 3rd century BC through maybe the 2nd or 3rd century AD. And these texts are getting bounced around. And when one person gets a version of it, then they want to kind of make their alterations, or they want to make some changes to it. And my theory about the Torah is that Bereshit is kind of like a standalone book of Torah. And it's like, in the same way that other people look at Devarim as a standalone book, I look at Bereshit that way, just because the writing is so different. I mean, and this book is attached to Torah. It's put on at the beginning. So somebody had some intentionality. They said, oh, we have this text, but we don't have, it's not complete. I mean, we need to add something to it. So they add Bereshit. And because Bereshit is just this weird compilation of all these different stories, and somehow it's supposed to come together into a cohesive narrative, which it actually kind of does in a weird way, It really does. I mean, but it could have gone a lot of other ways too. So anyways, that's my theory about it. And, here we're at the pinnacle. We're at the climax of Bereshit. So, the way that Bereshit starts is it starts with the creation, and it starts with the beginning of all things. And so Bereshit at the beginning is kind of a work of philosophy. And it's also kind of, a fanciful interpretation of science. So there's, the authors of Bereshit in the beginning try to imagine some kind of a beginning to all things. And that's really important. I mean, the authors of Bereshit at the beginning of this book are trying to imagine historic time. And they recognize that in the beginning, in the same way that a lot of other mythologies do, that in the beginning, none of this mattered. None of this existed, you know. And it's important to think about that at the end of this book, because each book of Torah is almost like an entire life. Like it's almost like the entire lifetime of an individual or a culture or an epic. It's supposed to be kind of reflected that way, even though it doesn't really work that way. But Bereshit especially. So Bereshit, like in the beginning of Bereshit, Genesis, the beginning of Genesis is like there's nothing, and then slowly things are built, but there's still like no civilization, no historical record, nothing. And so the authors understand that a good mythology needs a good start. And the start of the mythology needs to be from a place of nothingness, which is very good. That's a very good way to start a book. And it feels like this is like the start of this sacred text. And it's, whoever chose this made a good choice, because by creating Bereshit this way, it created a text that made sense to people organically. And so the text is able to carry itself. And so, in a way, Bereshit is also a testimony to good writing. Now, as an atheist, it's hard to really understand this as good writing because it's such bad writing. And it's just so much of it is so ridiculous. But when I'm not just deconstructing the text or analyzing it or criticizing it, when I'm just trying to admire it within the time it was written for the intended purpose it was written for, which was to, well, I don't know. I mean, you have to ask yourself too, who was writing this and what were they thinking and why were they doing this? I think that probably, it's pretty self-explanatory. Probably there was a group of people and they called themselves Jews, and they had a set of traditions, which we know there was definitely Jews and we had traditions. And they wanted and they had a bunch of stories. Maybe they even had some parts of the Torah, but they wanted to put it together more. They wanted something even more cohesive. And they probably, they probably felt what these people think and what a lot of Jews feel today, that this is like the word of God. And so their direct connection with what their idea was of a higher power is what propelled the text. So the text became religious propaganda. And the text, when it became the text of religion, and when it became something that was attached to whatever that culture's idea of God was, it became propaganda. And it became unalterable. So there's the text itself, and then there's the overlay adding on the idea of a God. And so, in a way, this is kind of what I think about the text in Jewish text. I think that, in a way, instead of worshiping a God over there, or like a statue as a God or an animal or something, I think that in Judaism, the God is the text. That's what I think. I think that we Jews worship the text. That's probably offensive. Everything I say is offensive because I'm an atheist. I don't even believe any of this. But I think that in general, when we study this text, I think the way it's supposed to be understood is that the text itself is God, or that the text itself is a pathway to God. So it's a placeholder for the divine. That's really what I think. Yeah, I think the text is a placeholder for the divine. And so in Jewish tradition, you're supposed to access the text in order to get to the God. And so the God is, you know, I don't know. The God is language. That seems like what it is to me. Who knows? Because it's like I don't know what a God is. That's one of the issues that I keep on coming back to over and over again in this atheist Torah study is that there's this God and the text keeps on referring to a God, but who is the God? What is the God? I mean, the God is different. It's like, and when you hear religious people assert that they know what God is, or that they can say what the God is, well, that's where the really interesting stuff happens. I mean, in a way, this might be more interesting as an exercise if I did it in combination with a devout person or with a bunch of devout people instead of trying to project what they think. But since I'm not, I'm just doing the solo, I have to kind of repeat what I've heard people say and hope that it reflects something true about what religious people think. Because when I meet religious people who believe in God, they seem to think that they know exactly what God is. And I know when I was indoctrinated, up until the time I was 18 years old, I thought I knew exactly what God was. I mean, I knew that God was a voice in my head. God was something greater than me. God was an intermediary. Um, God was reflected in the entire world and in nature. God was everywhere, and that somehow, if I prayed, I had the capacity to communicate with this God. And that, just like the Torah says, and just like the Bible says too, like somehow this God cares about me, or at least cares about his creation. Now, when we get to the next book of the Torah, we'll hear a lot more from the God. That's where it starts to get a lot more interesting because we start to hear the God more. And in a way that, well, it doesn't really descend. The language changes in the next book. But here it's still this part of the Torah is the most godless part of the Torah. But there's still a lot of God in here. But the God isn't that involved in the people's lives. They're more kind of standing on their own. Anyways, it's all very interesting. Anyway, so let's read some Torah. I might try reading a whole bunch of it and then commenting on it rather than what I've been doing throughout this whole Torah study, where I just basically what I've been doing is like reading a couple of lines and then just like talking forever. I mean, either way, I'll still probably end up doing the same thing, which is just saying a lot of my random thoughts about the text. Um, and I always say that I'm going to try to get through the text, but then I never do. So we'll see what happens. So where are we in the text? We're in the text where Judah and Joseph are talking, and the brothers have. So there's a famine in the land, and everybody's starving to death, and they're all going to Egypt to get fed. And so Joseph's brothers all go to Egypt because they're hoping that they can get some food and bring it back to their father Jacob and, save their family. So let's read some Torah. Vayigash, which is Genesis chapter 44, verse 18. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant appeal to my lord, and do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh." So Joseph has become, Pharaoh's right-hand person, and he's just as important as Pharaoh. and here's Judah and the brothers, and they've all kind of ended up before Joseph. And Joseph knows that these are his brothers, but they don't recognize him because he's got on like all the Egyptian bondage gear, you know. He's wearing all the Egyptian stuff, all the bells and whistles, and he looks like an Egyptian. It's like, and so they all think he's Egyptian. So they don't, I mean, how would they even know it was his brother? You know, they thought that his brother was dead. They thought their brother was dead in the story. It's all a story. So Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant appeal to my lord. Do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh." My lord asked his servant, "Have you a father or another brother?" So that's Joseph when it says my lord. I'm reading from Sepharia. And then his brothers answer, "We told my lord, we have an old father, and there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His brother, his full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother, and his father dotes on him." So what they're trying to say is that they came from a polygamous family with four mothers, and each mother had some sons, and one of them had a daughter. And they're all like part of this big blended family. And in this big blended family, like one of the mothers had two kids, and they were Joseph and I think Benjamin was the other one. And they're basically saying in this language that Joseph is dead and Benjamin is the one alive, and Benjamin is their half brother, and that their father dotes on him. So that's what they're saying, but they're saying it in this kind of interesting way that you don't see a lot of in Torah. It's like basically Joseph is trying to find something out, but he's trying not to reveal himself, and so he's kind of getting it secondhand. He's trying to. It's like, you know, when you do an internet, like when you do a Google search because you're trying to figure out something. By the way, ChatGPT is so much better than Google. I just want to say. But so you get on Google and you're like, you know, red, what's that creature called? Say red squirrel, nuts, suet, January. Like you're trying to figure out if red squirrels come and eat suet in January. But you're just typing in some keywords because you're trying to sort of like get the information. And it may not be the most accurate information, but it's like he's kind of like doing an internet search. And he's probing his brothers to get information about his family. But he doesn't want to reveal himself. So he can only kind of ask questions as if he's a questioner, an interrogator. And he has this power over his brothers, and so they have to answer him. So that's kind of what's going on here. But what else is going on is he's in a lot of pain and he's in a lot of trauma. And it's like you can see all of these aspects of what Joseph's going through by just kind of analyzing his state of mind in this moment. You can sort of see he's really suffering a lot. You know, you can really see how much he's suffering because he really is suffering. He's suffering so much here. And I think that this is another one of those parts of the Torah that goes beyond religion. Like for me as an atheist, I can feel a really deep connection with this. Not because I'm an atheist, but just because I'm a human being and I can see that this person is suffering. It doesn't exactly say it. I mean, you have to fill in the gaps emotionally. That's one thing about the Torah. The Torah doesn't really spend a lot of time acknowledging people's emotional state of mind. I mean, it does a little bit, like, well, it definitely knows anger. There's a lot of anger in the Torah. But the people who are angry most of the time in the Torah is God. Like, God's angry all the time. And of course, this is a projection from the writers because the writers are imagining that God's angry all the time. But, you know, there's this stern patriarchal God, and he's pretty much angry all the time, and he's just like, he's always like smoting everybody, he's smoting this person and he's smoting that person, or sometimes he tells everybody else to smote them, you know smote all the people, and he gets angry about everything. And no, I mean, he's such a bully. The god of the Torahs can be a real bully. But here you don't see the god. There isn't a god here. I mean, there's a little bit of a god, but not much. And you can see that Joseph is in a lot of emotional trauma. He's experiencing a lot of emotional trauma here. But in general, you don't see a lot of emotion in the Torah. Now, there is a little bit, and actually, besides the anger is the only emotion that's really consistently throughout the Torah. But the other emotion that really you see a lot here is actually coming from Joseph himself. So Joseph, in addition to being a dreamer, he's also somebody who has strong emotional reactions to his environment. They're not strong, they're just authentic, And that's one of the things I think people really love about the narrative, because in the narrative, Joseph's experiencing emotions, and he's man enough or woman enough, whatever Joseph is, that he can express his emotions authentically in the moment that he's experiencing them. And so, but there's also a lot that the Torah doesn't say, but that you can read. If you just look at the text, it's really easy, you can read it. And I think that's actually pretty good in terms of an analogy of how we understand each other's emotions. Because when you see somebody in person, you don't know anything about what kind of state of mind they are emotionally. You might be able to read something in their face in terms of the affect of their face for where they're at. But I really, I encourage people to not assume that they can know something about someone just by looking at them. And I think the Torah is kind of trying to tell you that. It's kind of maybe part of the reason it doesn't spend a lot of time talking about the emotions is because I think the authors are imagining that you kind of have to intuit that, and that the best way to intuit somebody's emotions is to actually communicate with them. If you really want to know what somebody's feeling, ask them what they're feeling, and try to understand their story. If you understand who they are, where they're from, what they're feeling, then you can connect with them in a really significant way. You really can. And I think that, we just get a little glimmer of what Joseph is feeling, but we can imagine a lot of it because a lot of it's just based on his story. So anyways. So let's keep on reading. So Joseph said, verse 21. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set eyes on him. That's Reuben talking. Reuben said, then you said to us, Joseph, you said to us, bring Benjamin down that I may set eyes on him. And Reuben, speaking for all of his brothers, verse 22, said to Joseph, Benjamin cannot leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die. And then Reuben, this is all weird third person stuff. So Reuben keeps on speaking in third person about himself and about Joseph, even though he's sitting there talking to Joseph. I think the idea in speaking in third person is it's supposed to give this sense that Reuben is being very subservient and very compliant, and that he recognizes that Joseph has all of this power over him in the moment. And so he's trying to speak about himself in the third person and to be like supplicant. So, I mean, I think that's what it's going for. I'm not absolutely sure about that, but I think that's what it's going for. So then Reuben said, we came back to your servant, my father. I don't know. This language, this is the English. It's kind of clunky. When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported my Lord's words to him. So Reuben saying, when we, the brothers, came back to Jacob, my father, we reported Joseph's words, my Lord, to him. Later, our father said, go back and procure some food for us. We answered, we cannot go. Only if Benjamin is with us can we go. For we may not show our faces to the man Joseph, unless our youngest brother Benjamin is with us. This is all very strange language. Your servant, Reuben, is calling himself your servant. So he's trying to say that he's agreed to be the servant of Joseph. Your servant, okay, here we go. Your servant. So he's trying to say that Jacob is also Joseph's servant. So even though Jacob was never there, they're speaking for Jacob as if Jacob was also speaking in this kind of supplicant language. So that's kind of what this is implying. So they're saying, Reuben said that your servant Jacob said. So this is like third person and third person. Anyway, so then it's supposed to be the voice of Jacob. As you know, my wife, Rachel, I think, bore me 2 sons. Or maybe that's Leah. No, Rachel. Rachel bore me 2 sons, but one is gone from me, Joseph, because they think Joseph's dead. And I said, alas, he was torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since. So in his head, so here's some, here's the little atheist stuff here. There's most of this is just trying to follow the story. There's a lot of this in the Torah, a lot of like complex storytelling that is sort of like, it's just this old narrative. Whoever did storytelling at this time when they wrote this, they wrote it this way and they thought that was good writing. And now we try to parse everything down and make it shorter and more concise. But this is this kind of circuitous roundabout writing the theme, the state of mind of Reuben is paramount in the story. So Reuben is the whole time supposed to be supplicant, he's supposed to be subservient, and he's kind of like pushing with information, but he's trying to do it in a way which continuously shows how he considers himself to be the servant of Joseph. So verse 29. If you take this one Benjamin from me too, and he meets with disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in sorrow. So what are they saying? They're saying, let's see. First of all, there were a couple of things I want to comment on here that I think are part of the story that's really interesting. So one is that it doesn't matter if Joseph's dead or not. In Jacob's head, Joseph is dead. And so he's been grieving Joseph, his son, for like 20 years or however long this has been. So in his mind, his actual son, his real son, is dead. And what does that say about death? It says that what really matters when somebody is dead is if you think they're dead or not. And the writer knows this. And so the writer's kind of playing with this. The writer's playing with this idea that that the father, the patriarch, thinks that somebody's dead. And that's one of the narrative grounds of the whole story, is this idea that he's dead. I mean, he's not dead because he's sitting. And then the other weird part about this story is like he's sitting here telling him that his father thinks he's dead while he's sitting there listening to him say that. So it's like you went to your own funeral to hear what everybody would have to say about you once you were dead. Kind of like that. A little bit. Not quite. Very different. So that's, what does that have to do with atheism? I don't know. Probably nothing. Anyways, so the next part that was kind of interesting. If you take this one from me, and he meets with disaster too. So again, this is like Jacob is just making it just abundantly clear, like who his favorites are, which is the root of the whole problem in the first place, that Jacob favors one or two of his children over all of his other children. And it makes his other children so resentful that they want to kill one of the children, which of course then becomes the plot structure for the entire story. So it's like sibling rivalry again. But there's a little part in here that you don't hear very much. You hear the word Sheol. Now, I've asked about Sheol. What is Sheol? Because, I mean, the place where Sheol comes up the most is it comes up later on in the Torah, in the story of Korach. Because in Korach, the ground literally opens up and everybody falls into Sheol. It's kind of like an earthquake or something. Everybody falls into Sheol. But it's obviously like there's places in the Torah where there's references to some kind of world besides the world. There's not a lot of it, but there's heaven. Heaven definitely gets referred to. I mean, and Jacob actually refers to a lot of these places. So Jacob imagines going up into heaven. He imagines the ladder where the messengers of God are coming up, down, back and forth between heaven and earth. And that heaven is basically this thing in the sky. So heaven is someplace where you go up, but it's not always, I mean, some places in the Torah it's called the heavens, but it's also it's sort of like another place. And it's associated with God. So that's kind of an atheist thing. And then Sheol is another place. And Sheol isn't really defined. I mean, there isn't like any gods or angels or anything associated with Sheol. It's just considered sort of like when the ground opens up and you go there. So Sheol is just kind of death. But over the years, it's been reinterpreted and it's been massaged, and it's kind of been massaged into the idea of something after death or something beyond death, like a gray world, or just like some kind of idea of, well, I don't know. It's not really clear exactly what Sheol is, but that's a good subject for an entire episode of an atheist Torah study, to do a whole bunch of research on what Sheol means, the many meanings of Sheol. I mean, I think that in the modern world, like for me, one of the best things about being an atheist was deconstructing the soul. So rather than believing that there's a soul and that a soul is like something separate from your body, some sort of infinite thing that like lives on for all eternity. I mean, it has so many problems. It's always had problems. But I mean, the first problem you would have when you think about the idea of what is a soul is that if you have a soul now and after you die, the soul is going to continue on past the body, then what was the soul doing before the body? I mean, was the soul like this thing floating around in time until there was a body and then it stepped into the body? Is that what a soul is? I mean, why do people need souls? Why do they need something besides their body and what their body is? Um, but I don't think that the most Jewish text doesn't really kind of go there, which is one of the things I love about Judaism. I think it's easier to be an atheist Jew than it would be, say, be an atheist Christian or an atheist Muslim. I think it's easier to be an atheist Jew because in the Torah, even though, but then why would you want to be an atheist any of these things? I don't know. There's really no reason. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be raised without a religion, then try to just enjoy your life. Don't get involved in this stuff because it's not really good for you. I mean, I don't think religion is good for people. I can't think of I can't think of much that religion has done over the years that's like been really good for people. I mean, when I think about Israel and when I think about Jewish history, right now, I will date myself a little bit by saying that right now, I'm just really, I'm not happy with how Jewish history has given meaning to what a, how do I say this? I don't want to say it and sound stupid or anti-Semitic. I'm just going to say it flat up. I don't like what Israel's doing. I've not liked what Israel's doing for a long time. Um, I think that, in the same way that I feel about the United States, I think that Israel is behaving unethically. I think they're behaving in contradiction to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think that Israel is being very unkind toward the Palestinian people. Um, and what's the point of this? The point of this is that this is this is one of the many places where we atheists first step onto the on ramp of atheism. And it's because we look at the moral behavior of a religion. Like, you look at how Christianity was practiced throughout most of medieval history and even into modernity, and how Christianity was used to justify slavery, and how Christianity was used to justify taking all of North and South and Central America, and you want to be an atheist. Anyhow, and so when I look at the way that the state of Israel is behaving right now, it makes me want to be an atheist. And that's just the truth, it really does. So that's what it has to do with atheism. And I can't remember exactly how I got onto this tangent, but I mean, it really does. It really just, when I look at how, oh yeah, this goes back to Sheol. That's right. When I look at how an entire culture practices, it's one thing to talk about how an individual practices a religion, and you can only really judge individuals. Well, you can't really even judge them because you don't really know what's going on with somebody. But you can understand individuals a lot more than you can understand an entire society. Although you can understand both. I believe it is possible to understand a civilization. I mean, you can use tools of social science to have some really broad general understanding of a civilization, although you can't really get at the soul of what a civilization is. But you can certainly understand individuals, at least something about them. But when I look at how Christians practiced their religion in America and in Europe. I would totally want to be an atheist. And when I look at how Israel is practicing its sovereignty in Israel, Palestine, it totally makes me want to be an atheist because it's like, what on earth are these people even doing here? Like, why are these people killing each other? You know, it's just like here to be. I mean, what were Christians thinking when they came to America? What were they thinking when they brought slaves over? I mean, what were they thinking when they spread diseases? What were they thinking, creating a society that was hierarchical with serfs and, keeping people in illiteracy and penury, for hundreds of years? I mean, what were people thinking and how were they benefiting from any of this? And it's like, I mean, I just think it's all a bunch of insanity, honestly. I mean, I think that if the religion were a standalone reflection on the past, then maybe there's something interesting there. I'm not even sure if that's interesting enough to like make it worth preserving. But when religion is then taken and used as a tool for the future, when it's used as something to arm a population for the future, that's where religion just goes totally off the rails, and I think that's kind of the God too. I mean, when you look at the Torah and you really think about what the Torah is, like the God, especially the angry God, who's always showing up most of the time in the Torah, the one who's like a real shithead and is always just making every atheist I've ever known who was an atheist, like if they were raised religious, they became an atheist at least. But besides just figuring out how ridiculous it was, they would become an atheist by looking at these parts of the Torah with the God who is this patriarchal, abusive God who, and I think that's future God. I mean, I really do. I think future God is the God of the atheists. Not the God of the atheists. The God that makes the atheists. So if there's a that's funny. Sorry, I laugh at my own jokes. It's ridiculous. Anyways, yeah, future God is the God that makes the atheists because future God is the one who's telling the Christians to go take over an entire continent and enslave people. Future God is the one who's telling the merchants that it's okay to go to Africa and enslave people and, create a whole other kind of genocide, a whole other kind of diaspora. And this is all future God talking. And in the Torah, future God is the one who's like telling all the people who are the slaves and who are now in the desert that they need to go into Israel and conquer Israel and slay all the inhabitants of the cities. And, that's future God talking. It's not so much past God, it's more future God. So I think that's the God of the atheists more than any of the others. I mean, they're all kind of the gods of the atheists because, like, there's so many ways to become an atheist by reading a religious text. I mean, there's just so many ways. And that's why it kind of surprises me that the text itself doesn't preserve the memory of atheists or doesn't preserve the contribution of atheists, because if the text would reflect the atheists within the text, it would actually make the text much richer, because the atheists would sort of wedge in there and kind of like ask some really good questions that kind of maneuver the text in ways that would make the text much, much stronger and much more interesting, honestly. So there's definitely a place in these texts for atheists in the commentary and the Jewish commentary afterwards. But unfortunately, you just don't see a lot of atheists because atheists were just kind of considered beyond the pale. I mean, we're not really included in any religious tradition, which is why we're atheists, So, but we should be included in a religious tradition because we're atheists, I mean, we're atheists because of religious tradition. And although there's actually a lot of atheists who are just born that way and they just have enough common sense, or they're raised with families who had enough common sense to just raise their kids without religion. But a lot of us become atheists because of religion. And so the religion would be better if it acknowledged our existence and didn't just call us like blasphemers or heretics or whatever. If it kind of treated us in the way that Jacob is treated in the Torah, as like somebody who's wrestling with an idea of God and wrestling with the tradition, that would be a much better religion, honestly, even if it still produces atheists. It would just be a better religion, and it would be better for the religion itself if it had that kind of tolerance. So, anyways. All right, well, I'm at the end of this. We've been doing Parsha. Let me see. I always forget. There's so many of them. We've been doing Parsha Vayigash. So stay tuned. Next week is, or not next week, whenever we get around to it. I think the next Parsha is, let's see, what's the next Parsha? The next Parsha is the last one of the Torah, Vayichi. That's the death of everybody. Everybody dies. So Jacob dies, Joseph dies, everybody dies. They're all dead. So, and that's the end of the book of Genesis. So we'll do that next time. Thanks so much for joining us. Sorry, I'm talking stupid. Thank you so much for joining me today on Atheist Torah Study. If you want to reach me, you can write to me at atheisttorahstudy@gmail.com. You can also find me on TikTok at Atheist Torah Study and on YouTube at Atheist Torah Study. Thanks so much. Have a great day.